if I say the Dark Ages, you're probably picturing a mud-soaked peasant, trudging past a rotting wooden cart.
Right, or maybe some guys in chainmail just standing around in the rain.
Exactly. You're picturing a massive pause button hit on human progress for, about 1,000 years. But what if I told you that exact same peasant might have lived walking distance from an architectural marvel that relied on a polygon ratcheting algorithm?
Which is a complex mathematical concept we didn't quote-unquote discover again until the 20th century, which is just wild.
It's completely mind-blowing.
It really shatters that stubborn myth of a vast intellectual wasteland.
Yep.
When you actually look at the physical evidence left behind between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance, well, that narrative of backwardness just totally falls apart.
Yeah, the structural engineering of this era was incredibly dynamic. It acted as a massive engine for social organization.
Definitely. And that is exactly what we're jumping into today.
Right.
What really stands out in these sources is that this isn't just a European story.
Not at all. We're looking at a living, breathing continuum of design from the 5th to the 15th centuries that just sweeps across Europe, the Islamic world, Asia, and Africa.
And the mission of this deep dive is to show you how the grandest, most awe-inspiring cathedral and the lowliest mud hut were actually part of the exact same cultural ecosystem.
Because if we really want to understand medieval technology, we have to start with, well, what drove them to push the boundaries of physics and material science in the first place, right?
Exactly. Without modern machinery, you need a highly compelling reason to move thousands of tons of stone.
In the Middle Ages, that reason was faith. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the heavy hitters, the Christian traditions in Europe. I was looking at the notes on the Romanesque era, so roughly the years 1000 to 1150. And places like Santiago de Compostela in Spain.
Oh, yeah, Santiago.
It sounds less like a quiet church and more like a massive transit hub. How did they handle that sheer volume of people?
That is the defining problem Romanesque architects had to solve. It was all about crowd control. Santiago de Compostela was a major magnet for pilgrims walking the Camino.
Right, thousands of people.
Tens of thousands. So the architects designed these massive load-bearing walls and barrel vaults.
Which is basically a continuous heavy stone archway, right? Like a half-cylinder roof.
Yeah, exactly. But to handle the massive foot traffic, they integrated ambulatories.
Which are what exactly? Like a hallway.
Think of an ambulatory as a wraparound walkway. It allowed this massive influx of exhausted pilgrims to walk down the side aisles, loop entirely around the back of the main altar, and venerate the holy relics in the radiating chapels.
Oh.
And then they could walk back out, all without disrupting the clergy who were actively conducting services in the center of the church. The building is literally a machine for processing pilgrims.
But visually, these Romanesque buildings are very dark and heavy.
Very heavy.
Because gravity is the enemy. And the only way they knew to build big was to build incredibly thick walls to support those heavy stone roofs.
Right, at least until roughly 1150, when we see a monumental leap forward in engineering with the Gothic era. We move from the heavy, grounded Romanesque to something that seems to completely defy gravity.
Yeah, I was trying to visualize how they did this, jumping from dark, thick walls to these impossibly tall spaces filled with glass, places like Notre Dame de Chartres.
Chartres is the perfect example.
And looking at the diagrams of rib vaults and pointed arches in the sources, it finally clicked for me. The ultimate solution they came up with is basically a medieval exoskeleton.
I really like that analogy. Break down how you see that working.
Well, instead of relying on the walls themselves to hold up the heavy stone roof, the Gothic architects took all that massive structural downward weight and just pushed it to the outside of the building.
Using flying buttresses.
Exactly. They built an external skeleton of stone arms to prop the building up from the outside. And by moving the load-bearing elements out there, it completely freed up the walls.
Right, the walls didn't need to be thick stone anymore.
They could become massive, towering panes of stained glass.
What's fascinating here is that the theology behind that structural exoskeleton is just as important as the engineering.
Really? How so?
Well, Abbot Sugar, who oversaw the rebuilding of the Abbey of Saint-Denis, championed this concept of lux nova, or new light. For the medieval mind, light wasn't just, illumination.
Right.
It was a physical manifestation of the divine. Those massive rose windows weren't just pretty decorations. They were complex cosmic diagrams meant to represent heaven.
And the architecture was guiding you through a spiritual journey on the floor, too. The sources point out that Chartres had this massive labyrinth embedded right into the floor tiles.
Yeah, and that labyrinth served a very specific purpose. Chartres housed a profoundly important relic believed to be Mary's tunic, the Sancta Camisa.
Right.
But for everyday believers who couldn't afford to make the dangerous pilgrimage all the way to Jerusalem, walking that intricate, winding labyrinth on their knees was a form of walking meditation.
So it was like a localized architectural substitute for a pilgrimage to the Holy Land.
Precisely.
That is incredible. But the structural leaps aren't just happening in Europe.
No, not at all.
The Islamic world was producing some of the most sophisticated architecture on the planet during the same period.
I'm looking at the notes on the Great Mosque of Cordoba in Spain, which is famous for its hypostyle layout.
Yes, the arches there are iconic.
Yeah, they're these alternating red and white striped arches stacked on top of each other. What was the point of building them that way? Was it just for looks? Well, no. The hypostyle plan, which just means a roof supported by rows of pillars, is brilliant in its infinite adaptability. If the congregation grows, you just knock down a wall and add more columns.
Like copy and paste.
Exactly. And those alternating red and white stones you mentioned are called polychrome voussoirs. A voussoir is just a wedge-shaped stone used to build an arch.
Okay, so why alternate them?
By alternating red brick, which has a little give to it, with rigid white stone, the arches could absorb seismic shocks much better.
Wow.
And at the same time, it creates a stunning, almost dizzying visual rhythm.
And then you contrast that flat, expansive feeling of Cordoba with something like the Shah Mosque in Isfahan, Iran.
Oh, absolutely.
Which uses a 4-Iwan layout, and
Right.
Iwan being a massive vaulted hall opening into a central courtyard. The engineering on these domes is staggering.
The Shah Mosque is a total masterclass in double shell domes.
Double shell.
Yeah, they built an inner dome perfectly proportioned for the people standing inside, and then a completely separate, massive outer dome towering over the city skyline, with empty space between them.
That's genius.
And to transition visually and acoustically from the square rooms below into those round domes above, they used mucornice.
Those are the geometric carvings that look almost like stalactites hanging from the ceiling, right?
Exactly. They are cascading, honeycomb-like vaults that not only look incredibly intricate, but actually act as acoustic baffles.
Oh, the sound?
Yeah, a sound generated directly under the main dome of the Shah Mosque echoes perfectly throughout the massive space. And there's a brilliant piece of spatial geometry at play here, too.
What's that?
The monumental entrance of the mosque faces the public square to align with the city grid. But the moment you walk through, the inner courtyard is angled sharply.
Why angle it?
It imperceptibly pivots your body so that the prayer hall aligns perfectly with the Qibla, the direction of Mecca.
It's a literal magic trick of urban planning. You walk off a secular street and the building physically turns you toward the divine.
It's an experience.
And you see this intense devotion shaping structures across the globe. Look at the rock-cut monasteries of Lalibela in Ethiopia.
Those are incredible.
They didn't build those up from the ground. Why did they carve them straight down into the volcanic rock?
Well, it was partly defensive, Churches hidden beneath ground level are much harder for invading armies to spot from a distance.
That makes sense.
But it was also profoundly symbolic. Carving downward into the bedrock represented a literal descent into faith, creating a new Jerusalem out of the very earth of Africa.
Contrast that with the Hoysala temples in India, which are built on these highly intricate star-shaped platforms.
Right.
Which sounds purely decorative at first, but the sources explain it was a structural hack.
A very clever one.
A star shape has significantly more surface area than a square. And since they were using soft soapstone, that extra surface area gave the artisans far more room to carve thousands of intricate deities and stories into the exterior.
Form following function perfectly. Or consider Toledo's Synagoga del Tránsito in Europe. On the outside, it is entirely plain blush.
Why so plain?
It was specifically designed to blend into the streetscape and avoid religious persecution. But the moment you step inside, it explodes with intricate stucco work and a beautifully carved wooden ceiling. The diversity of how humans built for their gods is just astonishing.
But as much as we love the cathedrals and mosques, they only make up the skyline. I keep wondering, what were the people who actually built these marvels living in?
A normal people.
Right. If we want to understand how medieval society functioned on a Tuesday, we have to look at the architecture of the everyday.
And just like the sacred spaces, vernacular or everyday architecture was entirely driven by function, necessity, and survival.
Give me an example.
Take the evolution of the feudal landscape. Castles didn't start out as massive stone fortresses. They began as very basic motte and bailey earthworks.
Which is essentially just a wooden fort, the bailey, perched on top of a giant man-made dirt mound, the moat.
Right, it was quick and cheap to build. But as siege warfare advanced, specifically with the introduction of powerful trebuchets that could hurl massive stones, well, wooden walls were utterly useless.
So they had to upgrade.
Exactly. So they evolved into massive stone keeps, like the Tower of London. And eventually you get the absolute pinnacle of medieval military engineering. The concentric fortifications like Crac des Chevaliers in Syria.
Built by the Crusader orders.
Yeah.
But why concentric, though? Why put a castle inside a castle?
Because if an invading army breached the outer wall, they found themselves trapped in a narrow channel known as a killing zone.
Oh, brutal.
Totally exposed to arrows and boiling sand dropping from the even higher inner wall. It was all about overlapping fields of fire.
Okay, so that's the military extreme. But if you were just a regular tradesperson living in an emerging urban timber town, like Rouen in France or York in England,
Yeah.
the sources say you lived in a half-timbered building with wattle and daub. How does that actually work?
Wattle and daub is one of the oldest and most effective building techniques. You take flexible wooden branches or slats and weave them together into a lattice, that's the wattle.
Okay, a woven wall.
Then you smear it or daub it with a sticky insulating mixture of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung, and straw.
Charming.
I know, but when it dries, it creates a remarkably strong, weatherproof wall right between the heavy timber frames.
And because urban space inside city walls was so tight and incredibly expensive, they used a hack called jettying.
Ah, yes, jettying.
The ground floor would have a small footprint, but the second and third floors would literally jut out over the street below. You'd have these upper floors getting wider and wider, almost touching the buildings across the narrow street.
It maximized your square footage without increasing your ground level taxes, which is pretty smart.
Medieval tax evasion.
Essentially. And the street level layout was equally ingenious. They used burgage plots.
What are those?
Since street frontage was at a massive premium, your actual shop facing the road would be incredibly narrow. But the property plot would stretch far, far back into a long rear garden.
Like a bowling alley.
Exactly. And that's where all the messy craft production happened, the tanning vats, the blacksmith forges, and keeping the livestock.
Hold on, speaking of livestock, the notes mentioned the rural vernacular, specifically the longhouses of northern Europe. They explicitly say people lived under the exact same roof as their farm animals, sometimes just separated by a low wooden partition.
They did.
I'm sorry, but between the smell, the noise, and the mud, how is that a functional home? It sounds miserable.
It definitely sounds miserable to our modern sensibilities, but everyday architecture was a matter of life and death, not luxury.
Fair point.
Think about the brutal freezing winters of northern Europe. Living with your livestock was actually a brilliant, highly pragmatic solution for central heating.
Wait, really? The animals heated the house?
A herd of cows constantly generates a massive amount of body heat. By keeping them indoors, that radiant heat would easily raise the ambient temperature of the human living quarters by several degrees.
Wow.
Which could literally be the difference between freezing to death or surviving till spring.
Okay, well, when you frame it as cows are medieval space heaters, it makes perfect sense.
And you see this climate-driven pragmatism everywhere. Contrast that cold, damp, northern European environment with the Maghreb in North Africa.
Okay.
There, you find adobe chasmas, these massive rammed earth towers.
Why rammed earth specifically?
Because of thermal mass. Those incredibly thick dirt walls act like a battery for temperature. They soak up the intense heat of the desert sun all day, keeping the inside cool.
Oh, and then release it at night.
Exactly. During the freezing desert nights, the walls slowly release that stored heat back into the living space, effectively moderating the extreme climate without a single piece of modern technology.
That is brilliant. And then you have the nomadic peoples of the Asian steppes living in yurts, which are these incredible modular lattice structures covered in felt.
Highly functional.
Yeah, they were highly engineered to be aerodynamic, so the brutal steppe winds would just whip around them rather than catching flat walls. Plus, the circular shape with the central smoke hole wasn't just structural. The sources say it served as a symbolic horizon line, connecting them to the cosmos.
Vernacular architecture also managed cultural rules too. The way a house was divided dictated how people interacted.
Like zoning laws almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
In the Islamic world, you see a strict spatial gendering. The Anderun, which was the private, family-oriented space heavily shielded from the street,
Right.
versus the Byron, the public reception area for male guests. The architecture was the physical manifestation of their societal codes.
So we've got these gravity-defying cathedrals and these perfectly climate-adapted everyday homes. But how did they actually pull this off? I mean, they didn't have CAD software or modern machinery.
Geometry. Geometry was the unifying science of the Middle Ages.
Just shapes and math.
Yep. For medieval masons building those Gothic cathedrals, they relied on proportional systems like ad quadratum and ad triangulum,
What do you mean?
using squares and triangles. They didn't need complex calculus. They could generate the entire intricate floor plan and elevation of a massive building by manipulating a single square or a single triangle over and over again.
That's wild.
It inherently ensured structural integrity and aesthetic harmony.
But the math they were using was mind-blowing, especially in Islamic geometric design. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, the Giri patterns.
Yes, I was reading about those stunning complex star and polygon tile layouts. For a long time, historians thought these were just basic straight edge and compass designs.
Right, but they aren't.
Not at all. It turns out, medieval designers were using a PRA, a polygon ratcheting algorithm.
Yes.
They were creating complex, non-repeating patterns that actually predate the modern discovery of quasi-crystals by centuries. They were doing advanced conceptual mathematics using tiles.
The structural experimentation across the globe was relentless. In China, you see the development of dugong brackets.
What are those?
They are incredibly complex interlocking wooden brackets that support the heavy overhanging temple roofs. But here's the kicker. They don't use a single nail.
No nails at all?
None. Because they are meticulously interlocked wood, the joints have a tiny bit of flexibility. When an earthquake hits, instead of snapping like a rigid stone pillar would, the dugong brackets flex and shift, absorbing the seismic energy.
So it's early earthquake proofing.
Precisely. Or look at England, with the invention of the hammer beam roof, like the one over Westminster Hall.
How does a hammer beam work?
Normally, to span a massive, wide hall, you need a bunch of vertical pillars in the middle of the room to hold up the roof.
Right, which gets in the way.
Exactly. A hammer beam roof uses a series of short, cantilevered horizontal beams extending from the upper walls, stepping inward and upward.
Like steps.
Yes, and it transfers the weight sequentially down to the thick walls, allowing them to create this massive, awe-inspiring, unbroken interior space without a single pillar blocking the view.
Okay, but this raises a huge question. How did this highly advanced, specialized knowledge fract? I mean, from earthquake brackets to polygon algorithms to flying buttresses actually spread across continents in an age before the printing press, let alone the internet.
War and trade.
Ah,
The Crusades, for all their violence, were massive engines of cultural exchange. European crusaders encountered the pointed arches and advanced concentric fortifications of the Middle East, and they brought that engineering back with them.
and trade routes, obviously.
Right. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for spices and silk, it was an information highway. In Central Asia, you start seeing the distinct forms of ancient Buddhist stupas merging seamlessly with Persian domed architecture.
And the merchant republics, like Venice, were the ultimate melting pots. The Venetian merchants built these massive trading warehouses called fondaci.
Beautiful buildings.
If you look at the facade of a fondaco, it is this beautiful, blatant hybrid. You have the delicate, lace-like stone tracery of European Gothic design sitting right alongside the sweeping OG arches of the Islamic world.
Yeah.
It's a literal architectural mashup of their trading partners.
But the knowledge was also carried in the minds and hands of the workers themselves, the itinerant, traveling craftsmen.
Oh, the masons' marks. This was such a cool detail in the research. Stonemasons would carve their own specific geometric symbol into the stones they cut so they could get paid for their piecework at the end of the day.
Yes.
Wait, so if they are carving their specific symbols into the stone, that's basically a medieval watermark. Or like early blockchain.
It really is.
Because historians today can look at a specific mark and literally track the intellectual property and the physical movement of a single craftsman as he traveled from a quarry in France all the way across the Mediterranean, building different structures along the way.
It proves exactly how interconnected this world was.
So if all these ideas are traveling via trade, war, and traveling masons, there must be places where these different architectural DNA strands actually mutated together into something new.
Absolutely. And the sources highlight a few incredible landscapes where the sacred, the secular, and these global networks collided perfectly. Take Mont-Saint-Michel in France.
That's the famous island commune that looks like a fairy tale castle rising out of the sea.
Right. And what's amazing there is how the physical elevation of the rocky island perfectly mirrors the social and spiritual hierarchy of the medieval world.
How so?
Well, at the very bottom, subject to the mud and the tides, you have the fishing village and the commoners.
Right.
Above them, in the middle tier, you have the heavy defensive walls of the feudal keep and the soldiers. And at the absolute peak, touching the sky, is the massive abbey and the sacred space.
So society is literally mapped onto the topography.
Exactly. But if you go to India, to Fartar Sikri, you see a totally different kind of synthesis.
That was the Mughal imperial capital, right?
Yeah.
Built in red sandstone.
Yes, it is a masterpiece of syncretic Indo-Islamic aesthetics. But what's fascinating is that in one continuous urban fabric, you have a grand Friday mosque, an intimate Sufi shrine, sprawling palace courts, and bustling secular bazaar streets.
All mashed together.
Yeah, it wasn't partitioned off into strict zones. The sacred and the everyday bled directly into one another, reflecting the highly diverse empire it served.
And then there's the Jingariba Mosque in Timbuktu, Mali. This is a monumental structure made entirely of earth, mud, and organic materials. And because of the harsh, arid climate, the mud walls degrade over time. So every single year, the entire community gathers in a massive festival to replaster the mosque by hand.
It's an incredible tradition.
Which makes me wonder, is Timbuktu the ultimate proof that a building can be an action rather than a static object? It literally only survives because of this annual collective ritual.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think you're absolutely right. It perfectly illustrates the social power of shared building rituals. The architecture isn't just the mud. The architecture is the community coming together.
The building maintains the community's bonds, and the community maintains the building's walls.
Perfectly said.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've covered massive ground, from Gothic exoskeletons and earthquake-proof brackets to livestock space heaters and quasi-crystal math.
It's a lot.
It is. So what does this all mean for you today? Why does studying architecture from 800 years ago matter right now?
The sources make a really strong case for what they call climate intelligence.
Climate intelligence.
Yeah. As we face modern environmental crises, looking at how medieval builders managed their environments without fossil fuels is vital.
That makes total sense.
The thick thermal mass of the kasbahs, the passive ventilation of courtyards, the aerodynamic intelligence of yurts, these aren't obsolete, primitive techniques. They are enduring, highly sophisticated lessons for building sustainably.
And it also teaches us about the resilience of what the sources call the palimpsest city.
Right.
A palimpsest is an old parchment where the original writing has been scraped off so it can be written on again. But you can still see the faint traces of the old text underneath.
Such a great metaphor.
Cities like Istanbul are architectural architectural palimpsests. They show us how layers of sacred and vernacular fabric can adapt and coexist over centuries.
Look back at the great Mosque of Cordoba in Spain that we discussed earlier.
Oh, right.
When the Christians reclaimed the city, they didn't tear the spectacular mosque down. They literally inserted a towering Gothic cathedral right into the middle of the hypostyle arches.
That's crazy to visualize.
The building absorbed a completely different cosmology and just kept going.
The building was strong enough, both physically and culturally, to just accept a new chapter.
Precisely. And that brings us to a final thought to leave you with today.
Okay.
Medieval architecture was designed with such profound material wisdom and communal purpose that it was meant to last for centuries, organically adapting to entirely new populations.
Unlike today.
Exactly. Today, modern society often builds disposable structures, erected cheaply and meant to last maybe 50 years before they're demolished and tossed in a landfill.
So true.
What if we started designing our homes and our cities as palimpsests again? What if we built structures with enough material intelligence and spiritual resonance that they actively invite future generations, people we will never meet, to inherit them, to value them, and to write their own stories over ours?